Welcome back, everyone, to Furthering Christendom. I am your co-host, Mike DeVito, here with Dr. Tyler McNabb, and we have an incredibly special guest today. It is really awesome to have Dr. Kelly James Clark here. Dr. Clark is a senior research fellow at the Kaufman Interfaith Institute at Grand Valley State. He's written a number of books and essays and articles, and has a CV that'll make any philosopher drool. Most recently, God and the Brain, and also a book, Strangers, Neighbors, and Friends, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish Reflections on Compassion and Peace. And so, Dr. Clark, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Mike. And Dr. Tyler.
Very, very good seeing you. I think that the last time we saw each other was in Israel, and you were giving me shopping advice or fashion advice, I think.
I think I was getting it, Tyler. I'm on the need end of that, not the giving end.
So, question for you. God and the Brain volume. Can you tell us a little bit about that volume, what you argue for?
I work, as you guys know, in what's called Reformed Epistemology, and it's the view that that you don't need to have evidence or arguments in order for your belief in God to be rational. And one of the reasons for that is that I think that God has given us like a sense of the divine. It's sort of built into us, and it draws us to God. It draws us to the truth. So I've argued that for a long time, and probably, as most philosophers will say, for no reason whatsoever, I've been defending that view. But it turns out it's pretty clear from work in cognitive psychology that we do have something like a sense of the divine. That we are cognitively disposed to believe in God. And I started working in cognitive science and religion about 10 years ago. And I was inspired by my former student, Justin Barrett, who's one of the pioneer psychologists in the field of cognitive psychology of religion. And I began to look at it initially just to see how is it like Reformed epistemology. In fact, Justin asked me to come to Oxford and give a talk comparing contemporary cognitive science of religion with Reformed epistemology, so just sort of a descriptive project. That was my first foray. I ended up writing the book. I have some initial reflections on that topic in my book, Religion and the Sciences of Origin. So I look at like the origins of belief in God. But I thought about it a lot more, and in particular, I thought about it a lot more because a lot of people use the fact that we're psychologically disposed to belief in God to try to debunk belief in God, to try to show that it's irrational. They tell stories like, you just believe that because you're psychologically disposed. You might think that you're just mad at you're just an atheist because you had a really bad Sunday school teacher or something. They try to expose the psychological origins of your belief, and so my book really is aimed at that, the debunking argument. But to do that, I think you need an overall view of what cognitive science shows. I also defend rational belief in God. A sort of reformed epistemology defense that's updated with cognitive science of religion. But what I really am after in that book is this question: does understanding that we're psychologically disposed to this or that sort of belief, in particular religious belief, does it undermine the rationality of that belief?
Very good, very good. Yeah, so sometimes you will hear philosophers say things like, the mechanisms, the cognitive mechanisms that are involved in forming theistic belief are unreliable because they also produce beliefs in ghosts or other gods or psychic stuff, and other persons, right? So we really can't trust these cognitive mechanisms. How would you respond to that?
Well, so I don't like the idea that, I'm glad you asked that question, because I know you it's that's a really blunt tool that the way you've asked it, and I know you know that. So I think what you have to do is sort of pull out what the mechanisms really are. And so some people, like Dawkins, called it the God faculty, and he calls it an irrationality mechanism. But then he doesn't look at like what it is, like there is this word we use to refer to what really is a set of cognitive mechanisms. And so you have to look at those individually. We don't have a God faculty. We have a whole bunch of different little faculties that all seem to contribute to belief in God. And so one faculty is the theory of mind, that we're inclined to attribute like minded behavior to lots of different things. Agency detecting device that, when you're out, I'll just give an example of one I give in the book, but suppose you're out walking in the woods at night and you hear a sound over to the left, and you look over and you see a face, and you're scared, your heart starts beating faster, and you think the face, and then you have to decide, like, is this person trying to hurt me or trying to help me? And then you go over and you get closer, and you see that it's just two knots in a tree. So a lot of things go on there. One is we have an agency detecting device. Like, we immediately think it's an agent when we hear that sound. And so we think it's something that can act like for a reason or on its own or of its own accord. That's an agent. And so we immediately think agent. Not always, but it's pretty fast that we think agent. So we have a cognitive mechanism that says agent. And then we also think that we start to think that maybe it's doing it for a reason. We start to think of the reason. So we attribute intention or motivation, or, is it there to harm us? Is it there to help us? Is it just lurking or whatever? Probably we attribute something negative to it. And then it turns out human beings are pretty good at anthropomorphizing. Like, we have an instinct to anthropomorphize. So it turns out we're pretty good at seeing any two circles that are fairly symmetric. We start to think they're faces. And then we fill in all the other, our minds are sort of active and they fill in all the other features. And so all three of those mechanisms were involved there, and probably other ones. And then you go over and you look and you see that it's a tree, and then a reasoning mechanism starts to work, and you start to readjust your beliefs in those cases. Well, I think the agency detecting device is reliable, and so it's trustworthy. I think a theory of mind is reliable and trustworthy. And I think our, excuse me, our a sort of anthropomorphic like instinct is reliable. They all produce false beliefs. There's no doubt about it. So by reliable, I don't mean that they're 100% effective, but in well over 50% of the cases, like so here's the thing. I'm looking at you. I don't really see you. I see an image. It's not really an image. It's electrons on a screen. And what my mind does is take those electrons on the screen. The way our minds work is it takes it and decodes that information. And I think I'm seeing you. And you are a person. You're an agent with intentions and with beliefs.
You're pretty good at that, right?
Yeah, and we're good at it. Like, we're good at it, and we can do it. And I don't need a person. Like, I don't need a person to do it. You're ultimately the cause, but I'm looking at a screen with electrons on it. That's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking at a person. I'm looking at signals, and my brain's taking that, and it's attributing. It's causing me to believe certain things, and I think those beliefs are reliable.
Yeah, so I'm curious. Do you still defend the view? I believe you wrote a paper with Justin Barrett where y'all articulate a particular view where you say it's reliable minimally in a very general sense, right? Namely, the hyper-detection device, the theory of mind, they reliably get us to become aware of divinity or the supernatural simplicator, right? Would you still say that's your view or one of your
No, that's still my view. I think what a lot of people try to do with this, what some religious believers do is too much. And actually, I think some atheists do is too much as well. Like it doesn't tell you that you should be a Protestant or a Catholic. It doesn't tell you that you should be a Christian or a Muslim. There is no, near as I can tell, cognitive science of any religion that anyone believes in today, because it's just way too complicated. We don't know it yet. There might be one sometime. We probably have some understanding of, like we're disposed to believe what our parents tell us, and our parents tell us things about religion. So, that's a huge factor in why people believe what they believe. So, that's going to be part of that story. But in general, the so-called God faculty that I described is one that you have to add some things to it, by the way. Because just with those three things, you can get belief in gods and ghosts and goblins, not just gods, and you can get belief in all sorts of different things about gods. But there are other things that get added to it, like so-called supernatural punishment theory, that seem to sort of have channeled human beings into what I think are roughly true beliefs about the nature of ultimate reality, that there is a God who's on the side of righteousness, and that he rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. And so he's not indifferent about human affairs, cares about human affairs. There are things you can add to it that seem to be, that human beings seem to be channeled towards.
Right.
All the big religions seem to have these beliefs.
Right. It starts to point to a particular, a little more metaphysically robust conception, so to speak.
Yeah.
So in my little elements volume, I reference y'all's response, and then I say I paint a picture of sort of a dark room where everything's pitch black. You can't hardly see anything in front of you. You can kind of recognize that there are objects in front of you. You go around, you feel, you test what's in front of you. Your other friends are testing what's in front of them. Maybe y'all make particular predictions. I think this is a piano, and someone else says, no, I think this is a TV, and so then maybe you test it. Well, this is a piano. We should hear on somewhere. We should hear some noise coming about, right? And that doesn't happen, so you cross that out. Well, if it's a TV, and so you sort of do this process using philosophy, right? Using the tools of reason, using science, and you can sort of better understand what is reality. So your faculties are reliable insofar as it's getting you to come to the right belief that there are objects in this room, but then you use philosophy and science to better understand what exactly these objects are. Something like that. Any thoughts on that sort of?
Yeah, I think I think the sort of generic cognitive science of religion that I've spelled out, it can only take you so far. It's really interesting how far it can take you. And then, well, there's a huge role for philosophy, theology, tradition. There's a huge role for how human beings work together. You mentioned you're in a room, but you're not alone.
Right.
We're not alone in this. So there's a communal part of this. I don't actually explore that very much, but the fact is, we do. I believe in atoms and electrons because somebody told me that. My science experiments in high school never worked, but I read in a book that there are atoms and electrons and that E equals mc squared, and I believe that not because I've done anything, but I read it in a book that reliably connects me with people in my community who are good at that sort of thing. So anyway, I think it's communal what we're doing here. Sure. We are trying to figure out reality, and our sort of basic cognitive mechanisms are helping us. I think they're God created, so I think they're sort of moving us in a certain direction, but they only move us so far, and then all sorts of other factors come in, and how we can go further.
And then I'll ask one more question, and I'll pass it off to Mike afterwards. One last thing, and I think we've talked about this briefly before in Israel, but be interested to see if upon reflection, if you still think this works. So I'm a proper functionalist. I believe you are as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so let's say that someone hears this information about cognitive science, and someone says, actually, this hyper agent detection device, you shouldn't trust it because it's produced belief in psychic sallies and ghosts and other gods and so forth. So you really shouldn't trust any of the beliefs that it's responsible for producing. And then the proper functionalist goes, oh, I'm thinking about what you're saying, but you know what? I still just find myself believing that God exists. I can't help my belief. And let's say that belief is the product of properly functioning faculties and the environment for which it's designed, and the faculties are aimed at truth. You think that person's still warranted?
Well, my daughter took my power cord, including my. So hopefully we don't run out of time here. I just got my cord back, but she has my power. You don't need to put that on the. I have 8% left. I'll probably go downstairs in a second where I know I have a power cord. I think some people are justified and some people aren't in those circumstances, and probably depends how firmly you believe it, why you believe it. I mean, I just think there are there's no one size fits all for this sort of thing. So if that person doesn't have can't find her way to a defeater of that defeater, can't find her way to think through. I try to do that in my book to show a person like that why. So here's the thing: there's this initial belief, and then she's got what we philosophers call a defeater. She's got a reason to that either it's a reason that counts against the conclusion, or it's something that undermines your premises, and so it's kind of undermines the conclusion. And she's got an undermining defeater here. It sort of undermines it. She sees it. She gets it. Maybe she doesn't get it right. Maybe she's wrong about it. Doesn't matter. She thinks she has something that undermines her belief. We're often wrong about when we make judgments. Honestly, human beings aren't good. This will be my only political thing. Republicans and Democrats should be a lot more compassionate towards one another because we're both often wrong, and we both often don't understand.
Amen, brother.
My book is a big plea for epistemological humility.
Sure.
And I think we need it in politics just as much as we need it in philosophy. Where we're just, our cognitive faculties can only take us so far, and then at any rate, we can be mistaken about a defeater, but if we believe it, it's a defeater, and we have to look into it. And so she might be mistaken, and without even so, and she might be right, and even so, without her being able to sort of work through it and come to see that there might be a defeater for it, it might be irrational for her to continue to believe in God.
So in this scenario that I paint in the Elements volume, I have in mind that the person just has such a strong seeming that God exists, even upon reflection of the data and where they think supposedly this points them to. And so they're just it never sort of defeats their belief to begin with. It might be
in her case that it never does. Yeah.
Right. So I was saying if you thought that was epistemically possible.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Very good.
Almost all stories, counterexamples are what I think are thin. So we almost never know the whole story. We never know the whole narrative. And then we often make really big epistemological conclusions based on those things. And so why we believe what we believe occurs in a context of a whole life. And it's hard to tell that story in the sort of detail it needs, but what you've presented so far seems right.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to see your thoughts on that. Mike, what about you? Any questions?
Yeah, no, Kelly, you had you did a fantastic lecture back in 2013 called "Is Atheism Normal?"
Oh yeah.
And I found it so interesting. And going off of what I think what you and Tyler have been talking about, but maybe to make it more direct, you said at the beginning, you said, I have a dirty little secret to tell you. Philosophers have no good empirical reason for anything they believe except Reformed epistemology. And so could you maybe, I know you guys have been talking about it, but just maybe talk about the connection between Reformed epistemology and the empirical support from cognitive science and religion?
Yeah, so Reformed epistemology is basically the view that we don't need arguments or evidence for belief in God, and I think it's unfortunately named Reformed epistemology, and it's unfortunate because the inventors of the term, Alvin Plantinga and Nicholas Wolterstorff, were followers of John Calvin, the great reformer, and turns out he wasn't the only one that had this view. There were lots of medievals that had the view. Calvin didn't invent it. Aquinas held this view. Anselm may have held this view. Augustine may have held this view. Lots of thinkers may have held this view. And they hold the view because they think that the Bible teaches that God has given us a sense of himself in Romans. Some philosophers take the Romans passages that talk about knowledge of God to mean that God has given us the ability to infer his existence. It looks more likely that God has just sort of implanted in us a sense of divinity. At any rate, it doesn't matter to me. I think the Bible's not a philosophy textbook, so it could go either way. I don't know what Paul meant exactly, but for me, it doesn't matter that much. But I am inclined, I do think that, I think that most of our beliefs are ones that are produced in us without inference or arguments. Hardly any of our beliefs are ones that we argue to. And cognitive science seems to show that. And cognitive science seems to show that we have at least a set of cognitive mechanisms that incline us to believe in God. Nothing like what Plantinga called the God faculty. He wanted there to be one in the brain, one somewhere distinct God faculty that was just devoted to belief in God. It doesn't look like we have one of those. But it does look like we have a set of faculties that incline us to believe in God, and we don't need an argument or evidence for that belief.
Yeah, and so in this lecture, Is Atheism Normal?, you kind of sketch out this empirical argument or statistical argument that religious belief is actually the norm, whereas atheism is actually outside of the norm, statistically speaking. So maybe just a quick overview of what your argument was. I know it was a while ago, but maybe your argument for the lecture.
So the basic idea is, is that the cognitive science of religion shows that religious belief is natural and normal for human beings. It doesn't show that it's rational or irrational. It doesn't show that, actually. It just shows that it's natural and normal. I actually think it also shows that it's rational. I think beliefs that are natural and normal for us are rational beliefs, but that's a philosophical conclusion. Psychology doesn't really have much to say about it, but psychologists can say, and they're right about it, I think, that religious belief is natural and normal for human beings. And so the title's provocative, Are Atheists Normal? Atheists don't like that title. They don't mind it when Richard Dawkins says that that religious believers are deluded, or that
atheists are lights or brights or something, right?
Yeah, the atheists are brights and the religious believers are the dulls or the dumbs they don't mind that, but the most sensitive people that I ever give lectures to are actually atheists. They don't like to be called All I say is that it's not normal. I don't say it's abnormal. I just say it's not normal. And what I mean by that is just like if you took a bell curve and you plotted, you know, how many, you know, who believes in God, you'd find out way more people believe in God. And then if you plotted atheism, you'd find out it's not at the norm. It's not at the center of the bell curve. It's not at the norm. And you would expect it. Here's the interesting thing. If cognitive science of religion is right, you would expect that there would be relatively few atheists. And there are relatively few atheists. So, so then I lead up to this. Atheists are getting madder and madder in the audience. And then I say, well, then so what? Like if I were an atheist, I would just, and I understood this, I would just say, so what? Like it doesn't say atheists are irrational. It doesn't say they're abnormal. It doesn't say I'm not saying they're deluded. I don't do what Richard Dawkins does, which I don't think Christians should do. I don't psychopathologize atheists. I don't try to say, you're just an atheist because, and then try to debunk their belief. I don't do that. And I don't think they should do it either. So I sort of try to model what I think is the way we should go about this.
Yeah, that's great. And Kelly, two more quick questions to finish up. After watching the lecture, I was wondering, you know, maybe it's theological anthropology or philosophical theology, but what can we draw from this idea that religious belief is there's an evolutionary component to religious belief? I guess more broadly as it relates to communion with God, and maybe more narrowly, specifically as it relates to salvation. You know, what do we make of the fact that atheists are the statistics show that atheists are atheists because of evolutionary components outside of their own control. And has it informed, I know you've done a lot of interfaith stuff, has these conclusions from cognitive science informed how you think of these things more theologically?
Yeah, well, so there's so many questions. I mean, so many issues in that question.
Sorry,
That's a
I know,
good
sorry.
question. So no, it's a great question. So like this, let's just take the fact that you can separate cognitive science of religion from evolutionary psychology of religion. Mm-hmm. I don't, because I think human beings evolved, and I think it's really interesting for Christians to think about, or religious believers in general to think about, like creation. What does it really mean? Because I think we have a sort of prideful tendency to think of ourselves as pretty godlike and not so much creature-like. And so, you know, Darwin put it this way: human beings like to think of themselves as a little less than the angels, and Darwin says, but we're a little higher than the apes. And I think we need to think about that, because I think we're creatures. We're not the creator. And so, you know, what does it mean to be created from the dust? And to me, it gives us a better sense of being, what it means to be a human being, to be a creature. So I thought a lot about that, and I've written a long time about the vice of pride and how it happens. How ye shall be as gods is the primordial temptation, and no one ever thinks they're trying to be like God. If I present this to people, they always think, no, not me. And then, so then I try to, in the past, I've done it more psychologically. In a book I wrote, When Faith Is Not Enough, I have almost half the book is sort of looking at that psychologically. And it's not an academic book, so it's a book that's had a big impact. Unlike academic books, it's a book that's had a big impact on a lot of people who aren't academics. Anyway, to me, that's the single biggest sort of theological point of reflection for me, is what does it mean to be a creature? And then here's this other part: we're not gods, and so to me, it should create in us a sense of intellectual humility, and we don't like that when it comes to theology or politics. We don't have it. We don't like it. We're all dogmatists about our most important beliefs, and there are psychological reasons why we're dogmatists, and it's not good because it's not really truth conducive for us as a community not to be able to talk to one another and learn from one another, and that can happen. Christians disagree over things they shouldn't be disagreeing about, because none of us is really in much of an epistemically privileged position to settle this. And I remember, I'll just give you one example since we're talking about Reformed epistemology, but predestination. I was in a church where people had the strongest view of predestination you could have, and where we thought that if you didn't believe in predestination, like if you were an Arminian, you probably weren't going to get into heaven. Like we thought that you, I don't mean you, but those Arminians,
Yeah.
I have no idea what you guys think, but those Arminians, they were going to bring one work with them, their faith. And we were just sure they weren't getting into heaven. And then people would question our thorough commitment to predestination, that God just decides from all eternity who the elect are. And we would laugh and mock people that disagreed with us. And now I'm sort of embarrassed even to repeat that. Not that people shouldn't have that belief, but to me, it's not so certain. Sure. Based on scripture, and that you shouldn't put down people who are doing their best, right. To figure things out and come into a different conclusion. And then I start to think this about Jews and Muslims. It's given me a better, I'm not tempted to Islam in the least, but I see Muslims doing the best my Muslim friends doing the best they can to try to figure out what ultimate reality is like and order their lives around it. So, I say more power to them. It's helped. I think it's made me more generous epistemologically. Like I can see why people would come to a different set of beliefs than I do.
Let's say that there's an atheist, we'll call him Bob, and Bob, his faculties aren't functioning properly. Maybe there's something like autism as playing a vehicle, right? As you talked about in your speech, that puts him at maybe a disposition to not have as a strong theory of mind, and for whatever reason doesn't see mind as ultimate reality, right? Do you think that this person is less culpable in reference to, let's say they're an atheist and they die an atheist? Do you take it that maybe this person's in a different epistemic situation with respect to their beliefs, who God's going to judge them differently than, say, maybe someone who did know better or something like that?
Yeah. So let's suppose that Protestantism is true, and that you have to be a Protestant to get into heaven.
I'm done.
Well, guess what? You are epistemically blessed if you were born in West Michigan.
Right.
And you're epistemically blessed if you're not autistic. You're epistemically blessed if your parents weren't atheists. You're epistemically blessed if all of your best friends were not atheists, because friends play a big role in what we believe. All sorts of, we might call them luck. You can call them providence, however you want to say it. So it also turns out that one blessing with respect to belief in God is not to be autistic. If there's a personal God, people who are autistic, turns out the one thing that everyone agrees on with autistic individuals is that they lack a fully functioning theory of mind to various degrees, and some lack it completely. And so they can't read social cues because they don't know, based on what how your body or face is shaped what you're thinking or feeling. They can't tell if you're sad or angry or happy or laughing, or they can't tell. And so they don't know how to respond appropriately. So some autistic individuals lack it complete theory of mind completely. Others lack it to various degrees. We probably all know philosophers who lack a fully functioning theory of mind, can't read social cues very well. The higher up you are in the autism spectrum, the more likely you are to be a man, a scientist, a mathematician, a physicist. The higher up you go, and so if you lack, and so I try to demystify autism a little bit with respect to cognitive science or religion in my chapter, and I hope people read it and read what I say, because I try to provide thick narratives there instead of thin narratives about. So I only tell the story of two people in a lot of detail before we draw any conclusions in the chapter on autism. And the thing I want to say is, it's not up to me who gets in or who doesn't get in, but if I were God, I would think autistic individuals have a defect and can't be held to the same level of responsibility as people who have properly functioning cognitive faculties. To me, that's just the way it goes. And I'll just say, and I can't imagine that God would be unjust to people who don't have fully functioning cognitive faculties. And
that's fantastic. Yeah, that's so good. Intellectual and theological humility. That's great. And Kelly, just real quick, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time today. Just before you go, put us on the front lines of cognitive science and religion. What are some of the issues and topics being dealt with there? And then maybe some of your own work, what you're working on, and any new projects coming out, anything like that.
Yeah, so I got into this. I'll just mention one other area. Philosophers are obsessed with belief, and the cognitive science of religion is not so, or among psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists who work in this area, it's not so belief obsessed. Like a lot of it, the really interesting work is on rituals and how ritual shapes and form us, and how communities shape and form us. And so I wrote it. One of the most interesting chapters. I have a book under consideration on early Chinese philosophy, and then the rituals that early Chinese communities did, and then how these rituals. One thing I do in the book is try to say that people who say the early Chinese philosophy doesn't have any God beliefs or God, I'm trying to debunk that view of early Chinese philosophy. And that's not my baby, it's my neighbor's, if you can hear it.
And I love your work on that, by the way. For anyone listening, your papers and so forth on that topic are just tremendous and really, really good, solid stuff.
Thanks. So I ended up writing, I was learning about ritual as I was in cognitive science, not because I was all that interested in it, actually. I'm interested in beliefs. And but you couldn't not read this. And anyway, I began to read a lot more about ritual and to see that early Confucian thought, and the rituals involved belief in God, they involved the community, getting together in certain ways, and doing certain things. And cognitive science of religion began to make me realize how ritual shapes human beings and human communities. And that now I've begun to think about that in a context of Christian belief. I was just I think Protestants, by the way, are utterly focused on ritual. Sorry, not on ritual. They're anti-ritual and utterly focused on belief and getting beliefs just exactly. You have to have exactly the right belief. If you're off just a little bit, God isn't going to let you into heaven. And then, so getting exactly the right belief. And then, so I think growing up as a Protestant, I've missed the importance of ritual to shaping human people, human communities. So that's something I'm looking into now
Wonderful.
in a deeper way.
Awesome. Well,
And
that
I'm
sounds
writing a
very
book
good.
on love, by the way, in the Abrahamic traditions. And I'll be looking there at how rituals are part of the transformation process from
Wonderful.
selfishness to being more loving, how that happens, how that works. And then how each community sort of tries to affect that.
That is
Yeah.
fantastic. Dr. Clark, we're going to have you back on the show to touch on all those topics. But
All right.
this has been great. It's been an honor to have you on here. I can't thank you enough. Dr. Kelly James Clark, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yes.
My
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Thanks for having me. See you guys.
See ya.
I
Live
know.
long and prosper.